in this American government section. We have a very special guest speaker today for this week's assignment here. I have brought on this call an immigration attorney to talk to you about a little bit about immigration and dealing with the federal government from that perspective, just to sort of kind of think about government in a different way, in a different context. Krista Eyler is an immigration attorney. She is joining me from all the way basically 7 feet below me because Krista is my wife. She gets the nice dedicated office in our place. I get to be in our guest bedroom and work from there. So thank you for joining us, Krista.
Hi, everyone.
So I just have a few questions here. Obviously, I know the answers. We've been married for a while, 2008. So I'm many. Is 2008, right? Yeah, however many years that is. So I just have a few questions here. First off, tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you want to become an attorney.
So, I did well in college and I wasn't done studying, and I'd gone to some various career fairs and, really looked at what a good next step would be for me. And I, had an inclination that I wanted to help people, and I wanted to be challenged. And then, I'd also, through that exploration, learned that, with a Juris Doctorate or a JD law degree, it's a very versatile degree. So even if you don't want to practice law, the skills you learn, kind of situate you to enter other careers should something shift. So that was probably the biggest thing for me. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't convinced that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I kind of wasn't done with school, and it seemed like the next best step.
Cool. And where did you do your undergraduate education, and what did you study?
So I went to Wittenberg University, which is in Springfield, Ohio, which is about an hour or so west of Columbus. I'm bad with directions. It's a small school, only about 2,000 students, and I studied political science, Spanish, so a double major because I do speak Spanish, and I had a minor in global studies.
Cool. So there you hear it. There's another endorsement for a political science major there. And where did you end up going to law school?
Ohio State, which is obviously in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah. So the backstory there is that Krista and I met. I was in graduate school at Ohio State. She was in law school there. The secret is we actually met on Match.com. That was back when it was really creepy and you didn't tell your parents that that's how you met. But yeah, that's kind of the origin of us. Cool. So tell us, what's my next question here? Kind of how did you enjoy law school? What was that overall experience like? And then how did you end up landing your first job as an attorney?
The law school was really hard. I didn't like it initially. Everyone talks about that first year of law school and how difficult it was, and it truly was that. It really teaches you they kind of break you down to build you back up, is what they say, because they have to teach you a different way of thinking entirely. And so my first year was quite brutal. I was pretty convinced I wasn't going to do it anymore, but my mom said I wasn't allowed to quit in jest. But, we had those conversations. I wasn't going to quit, but I really did want to. And then my first semester, second year, we had a long fall break, and I went down to Harlingen, Texas, and worked with a nonprofit organization there at Port Isabel Processing Center, which is a big center for processing individuals who had just crossed over the border. And I went with a friend of mine who was from Venezuela, who we went to law school together. And I did that work, and I thought, wow, this is what I really want to do. Immigration really resonated with me, in part because I speak Spanish, in part because I like other cultures. I've traveled a lot, and I, was really excited about being able to incorporate, dealing with people from other cultures in my profession. My first job, took a little bit of work. Like I said, I went to school in Ohio. I spoke Spanish. I was kind of ready to leave Ohio. Ohio State just had a one immigration law course offered every other year. And that year it was offered for me was that same semester that I went down to Texas. So I wasn't able to take it. And so I graduated and had really no immigration training. So what I did is I would go to various CLEs and seminars to try to get as much information as I possibly could. And during a CLE that was sponsored by the American Immigration Lawyers Association that I attended in Chicago, I sat next to a woman in Florida who said, "Hey, I'm looking for an immigration lawyer," and off I went. I obviously did a lot of applying, and there were some things percolating around, but none really looked as enticing as working for her. And so we moved to Tampa, Florida, about 6 months after I graduated law school.
Yeah, and CLE, what does that stand for again? Just
Continuing legal education. So, I mean, it'd be for people who needed those credits in order to maintain their bar license. For me, it was more just going as like an informational session, just to try to get some additional information.
cool. So tell us a little bit about how long you've been a lawyer, and then just kind of describe the type of cases you do, the type of immigration work that you typically do.
So I've been a lawyer since 2004, so that's 18 years, which is a really long time. We work with individuals and companies. I don't do as much of the employment-based immigration side as one of the attorneys in my office does, but we really handle all aspects of immigration. So individuals wanting to bring a spouse from abroad, a fiance from abroad, helping people get their green cards or their permanent residence, helping people become citizens. We help people apply for asylum. I represent people before the immigration court, which is, the place where foreign nationals, if there's a threat of detention, or a threat of removal from the United States, they need representation there. Consular processing, meaning we help people get visas. We do all aspects of immigration law.
How would you say that immigration law differs from other areas of the law, such as criminal or civil or any of that other stuff?
Well, so immigration's administrative, so rules of civil procedure and rules of evidence and such apply, but not nearly as strictly as they do in like federal courts. It's a little more loosely organized. You're dealing more with government agencies than you are with, for example, like family law. It's a husband and a wife. They're two individuals kind of fighting about things. Whereas, everything that I do is against a government agency. So one of the big benefits of immigration is that, the only loser is the government, and they're really not losing. And so it's not like in a family law situation where, oh, we took that man for extra money. Like we don't have that here. It's the area of it generally, makes you feel pretty good about the type of work that you do.
Yeah, one of the things that you often hear people talk about, including our respective families, is people should just immigrate the legal way, or they should just do the legal process instead of coming illegally or doing these other things. Kind of based on your experience, how would you respond to that? What are the options that people have for immigrating legally?
That could be a whole CLE in and of itself, but generally speaking, our system is a preference-based system, which means you generally have to have a family member or an employer sponsor you. And in order to be eligible, or what the term in immigration law is admissible, you have to meet certain parameters. And so a lot of people don't meet those parameters. Not only do they not have someone who can petition for them, they may not, have all the eligibility criteria. If they do have an individual that can petition for them and they're otherwise eligible, sometimes the wait times are 15 years, and I'm not kidding. And the best, like if you were to tell me today that you wanted to petition for your parent to come to the United States from Hungary, I would tell you it would probably, best case scenario, take 1.5 to 2 years. And so people are oftentimes shocked about the wait times associated with that. It's only become more difficult over the past, I'd say, 8 to 10 years. Everybody I meet would love to immigrate the legal way. It's unfortunate, though, that, a lot of them aren't able to. So it's not a choice of not being interested or unwilling. It's a situation in which it's not possible.
Interesting. You mentioned changes and stuff. So over the course of an 18-year legal career, what are kind of some of the changes? What's changed and what hasn't changed for better or worse over the course of your career?
I mean, for the most part, the law, like the statutes, haven't changed. Like the Immigration Nationality Act hasn't changed. Immigration is also controlled by regulations and agency memorandums, and obviously court case law. Initially things were on the up and up in terms of processing and the way that the immigration agency itself functioned. They had become more efficient they were only getting better at their job. And then, I'd say about 6 years ago, it started to decline substantially. The system was kind of coming unglued. They weren't processing things the way that they used to. There were a lot more errors. It wasn't as fluid. And, it's in a weird time right now, like it's trying to repair, but they're also trying to revamp it. And so it's not necessarily that the law has changed. It's more the way that the immigration service reviews its filing, and the way it processes filings has changed substantially over time.
So, just trying to remember, who is it you typically are kind of working with on behalf of your clients? Is it like TSA? Is it CBP? Is it, what are the
So
government
we work
agencies?
with two main agencies. We work with the Department of Homeland Security, which includes U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which is the agency that obviously manages the border. We deal with Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, which is the arresting or the enforcement arm of immigration. They're the ones that manage the detention centers and the ones who work with local law enforcement. Like if someone is picked up for a DUI, ICE is the one that comes and investigates to determine what legal status they have. And then the benefits processing side is USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. They're the ones that have the offices that you go to when you're applying for your green card. Then the other one is under the Department of Justice. That's the Executive Office of Immigration Review. That's the court. And sorry, there's actually a third one, which is the Department of State. They manage the consulates that do all the visa processing. So in any one particular client's case, sometimes we touch all three of those agencies. And you'd be really surprised about how challenging it can be sometimes to get those agencies to communicate. It's gotten a little better, but there still remains some deficiencies.
I want to go back to one thing you mentioned too, and this is always something that I find perplexing. Is there a preference based on your nationality of trying to immigrate to the U.S.? Do people from one country sort of have an advantage over people trying to immigrate from others?
Well, Cubans used to, with the dry foot, wet foot policy, which was, if they could get here and get on soil, then they would be able to apply for their green card without having a petitioner after they were here for a year. That policy went away, so they no longer really have that preferential treatment. I wouldn't say otherwise there's much preferential treatment. It's more that there's certain categories where there's a significant number of foreign nationals from those countries: Mexico, Philippines, India. In some classifications, Hondurans, El Salvadorans, they have to just wait longer because in the preference categories, there's a certain number of visas that are allotted each year to various categories. And those thresholds are met for countries through which there's a high number of immigrants. And so based on that, those people have to wait longer because their slots get filled faster, in essence.
You said sometimes upwards of like 15 years, did you say?
Yeah, for if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to petition for your Filipino brother, it's like 15 years or maybe longer. I don't know offhand. It
Wow.
changes every month.
So this is salient right now, and I almost don't want to mention this because I like to use these videos in subsequent semesters and not have to interview them again or do them again. But we're in the midst of obviously the Ukrainian conflict with Russia. Have you talked to any, just generally speaking, Ukrainians? Are you familiar at all? Like, what are kind of the options? Can a Ukrainian leave Ukraine and come to the U.S.?
Not
What's going on?
easy because asylum is for people in the United States. It's not for people abroad, and asylum is not for people from a war-torn country. Asylum is for individuals who have a well-founded fear based on a protected ground, which is unfortunately not civil strife in a country. There was an announcement recently that if Ukrainians are in the United States, I think as of March 7th, they're able to apply for temporary protected status, which isn't a permanent status, but it does afford them a work card and some ability to be here lawfully. Otherwise, for the Ukrainians abroad, what we're seeing is that they're encouraged to get out of Ukraine, get to a third country like Poland, or other places that are saying that they'll process visa applications. But again, there's no category for, I want to go to the United States. Like the United States hasn't, done a humanitarian parole. Tourist visa doesn't apply because you're not coming here to visit, you're coming here to stay. So, as of right now, the United States isn't really affirmatively doing anything to help with the refugee crisis of the Ukrainians. They're basically just putting that on the Europeans and saying, you guys are close by, you guys sort it out, and then we'll go from there.
Another one that's been in the news a lot over the last couple of years has been DACA. Can you kind of give us an overview of what that is, and can you tell us, do you work with any clients that are DACA eligible, or how does that
I
work?
can't, so there's a government stay on filing an initial DACA application right now. So if you don't have DACA, even though you qualify, you can't get it now.
What does it stand
That would
for? Sorry.
Deferred action for childhood arrivals. But I have lots of people who have DACA and you can renew it. You just cannot file a new application right now. Subject to change. It wasn't an option, then it was an option, and then it wasn't an option again. So right now we're kind of sitting tight and waiting.
So is the idea that's for individuals who were brought here as children, young
Yeah,
children?
there's
Is that how it works?
specific parameters you have to meet. I think you have to have been here before 2012. You have to be under 31. There's some very specific requirements, but it's basically for people who were brought here as children, who don't otherwise have a disqualifying circumstance, in order, and allows them to get, each time they apply, a 2-year work authorization document.
Gotcha. Just a couple more questions here. One I want to ask, what are some of the misconceptions that you think, those of us who don't do immigration law or don't really live in it, have? Kind of, what do you read, and what do you hear from people that if you had a free moment, if you could talk to the world and say, like, no, I want you to know this about immigration, what would it be?
I mean, I think people see them as a drain on society and see them as people that don't pay their taxes, and that's not the case. I mean, most times they're the hardest working people I know. They want nothing more than to be here and contribute to their communities. They do get tax ID numbers. They do file their taxes, sometimes more honestly than a lot of US citizens. So I think that they just need to be almost rebranded and seen as a valuable component of our society rather than a group that takes away from what our society is.
Interesting. Without obviously naming names or giving too specific, getting too specific, has there ever been like sort of a case or something that sticks out in your mind over the course of your career that was just particularly rewarding, that really sort of reinforced your decision to become an attorney?
I mean, I mean, really almost every week, if not every day, I feel like I make an impact on someone's life, which is why I do what I do. The most rewarding cases are probably those in court, particularly related to asylum, because they take a lot of work to prepare. They're very difficult. The client situations are very sad and traumatic. And, if we can't convince the court that they should be allowed to stay, then they could be returned to a country from which they, left because of being harmed or beaten or whatever the circumstances are. So I think that those are probably, the most persuasive, but also is, helping a family be reunited, or, fixing a case that someone else did wrong. We have a lot of dramatic positive impact on people's lives.
That's cool. So, yeah, I'm just a little bit curious about that too. So, like, for say you're a spouse and you've been brought over here on a marriage visa, and then your spouse ends up being abusive. I mean, is your only option to return to your country? Do you have any ability to stay and separate from that relationship, or are you stuck, or how does that work?
So if you came as a spouse, then you probably have your permanent residence, which means that you have permanent status here. Although if the marriage was less than 2 years old at the time you came, then you have to remove your conditions. And if you are abused, there are circumstances related to that. Along similar lines, though, if you're in the United States and you marry someone and he or she is abusive, then you are able to apply for something, an I-360 under the Violence Against Women Act. That does apply to men. I have helped men do it. That allows them to get their green card, assuming they meet certain criteria. It's very hard. It's not just, oh, he was mean to me. It's much more difficult than that. And there's lots of criteria that have to be met.
Gotcha. Kind of final question here. If we happen to have any students in the class that are considering a career in law, what sort of advice or direction would you kind of give them in 30 seconds or so?
Say, definitely check out the career fairs, talk to, different schools to explore like what their programs look like. I would definitely encourage you to talk to lawyers, different types, lawyers that work at big firms, small firms, work on their own, people who work for nonprofit, just so that you get into a sense of what day-to-day life as a lawyer is like. It's not, you know, your your time is your commodity. So, lawyers have to work pretty hard for what they do, which, and for most instances, it's good, but I think, it's particularly when, I mean, perfectly honest, when you're thinking about, student loans and things like that, you want to make sure that it's something that you're interested in doing because, it's a big undertaking. So, it's certainly can be the path that's best in certain cases, but it's a good idea to explore various alternatives.
But it's big money, right? You're about to leave to get on your private jet and go to Vail to ski, right? Is that the?
Not so much.
Yeah, yeah. No, more like I've been driving your car because mine burns too much gas and it's too expensive. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and thank you to my wife for recording this. This is something I've done in past classes, and it's always been interesting and fun to do. And Krista did mention she actually had a pretty huge hearing today, so we're all very proud of her for the work that she did on that and appearing before the judge. So it's super exciting. So yeah, thanks so much for your time, and I'll literally see you in like 15 seconds. So
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
all right, bye
Bye.
bye.